Middle East and North Africa region is experiencing serious troubles due to interethnic, interconfessional, and other clashes and expressions of extremism, terrorism. Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Syria are in the throes of crises. Other countries are also in very difficult situations, including in the African continent, and a further deterioration of the situation could be a serious threat to international peace and stability. More than once it has been stated that this situation is a direct consequence of the terrible practice of geopolitical engineering and the interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states, attempts to change regimes, including through the use of force. Now, the situation in Syria is particularly concerning. From the very start of the Syrian crisis, Russia has always been in favor of a purely peaceful solution to the crisis while preserving the sovereignty and territorial integrity of this ancient country. We continue to be convinced that there is no alternative to a political process based on mutually respectful, inclusive inter-Syrian dialogue without any preconditions, while ensuring a cessation of hostilities, expansion of humanitarian access, and enhancing the effectiveness of the fight against terrorism. This kind of comprehensive position is enshrined in the decisions of the International Syria Support Group and in the resolutions of the Security Council, first and foremost in Resolution 2254. To implement that resolution and the requirements it contains, Russia and the United States, as the co-chairs of the International Syria Support Group, agreed on a number of points. Work on them lasted over 6 months and was completed on the 6th of September. After 3 days prior to that, in China, the presidents of Russia and the United States agreed to the last issues that had to be resolved before reaching a final agreement. I would like to apologize that I'm referring to a document that no one in this room practically has seen, actually. But Russia is still ready to make them public and to circulate them within the United Nations. And I want to, in particular, mention that within as part of these American-Russian agreements, it's underscored that the key priority is to separate the opposition forces from the terrorists of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra in order to effectively ensure the cessation of hostilities regime, in order to resolve humanitarian issues, and what's most important, to put an end to efforts by terrorists to escape punishment and justice by using the cover of their cooperation with so-called moderate participants of the cessation of hostilities regime. The agreements entered into force on the 12th of September. Once again, I repeat that their absence in the public domain doesn't make it possible to check certain aspects. But I just want to mention that these agreements mention the need to ensure humanitarian deliveries through the Castella Road. And for that, it was mentioned that the government and the opposition that controlled various sectors of that road should withdraw their forces at an equal distance from the road, and that distance was specifically mentioned in those agreements. The government forces began withdrawing their forces as required in accordance with the U.S.-American agreements, but only to see that the opposition did not act similarly, reciprocally, but in fact started shelling government forces. And this happened more than once. And the opposition forces have still not withdrawn their units from the Castella Road, as demanded in accordance with the 9 September agreements. And overall, we, through our Ministry of Defense, have ensured constant monitoring of what is going on along the Castella Road and around Aleppo. And on the website of our Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense, it's very clear of who is complying with the agreements and who isn't. Now, last week, through the Center of Operational Reaction Center that we established in Geneva with our American partners, we conveyed to our American partners information about 300 cases of violations of the cessation of hostilities regime by Ahrar Asham and a whole number of other opposition groups, including those the names of which were provided to us in the list of those groups who were supposedly joined the cessation of hostilities regime. There were violations in Aleppo, in the Homs, Homo, Latakia, Dera provinces, and in the suburbs of Damascus. I want to underline that the information provided is reliable. It is based not on reports in the internet or through the media, but it is obtained on the ground by Russian military monitoring groups. And so this information is based on concrete examples. Violations include shelling using light weapons, mortars, multiple rocket launchers, homemade multiple rocket launchers. Now, a clear violation of the cessation of hostilities regime were the strikes on the 16th of September by the coalition against positions of the government forces Deir el-Zor. And immediately after those strikes, ISIS began an assault against government forces. On the 19th of September, another unacceptable provocation occurred. I'm talking about an attack against the humanitarian convoy in an area under the control of the opposition. I just wanted to mention that on the same day, on the 19th of September, in that same area, in the so-called Ramusa Road, a very aggressive attack was carried out by al-Nusra and their allies against government forces. As a result, the jihadists managed to make progress in the 1070 region or portion. Now, I am sure, I don't have any proof, but I'm sure that these kinds of coincidences require serious analysis and investigation. And we insist on a very thorough and impartial investigation of the attack on the humanitarian convoy. Many said that it could have been a rocket or an artillery shelling. That was what the initial reports were. Then helicopters or warplanes were mentioned. So I think we need to refrain from emotional reactions and make comments immediately, public comments, but first to investigate and be very professional. I just wanted to mention that the distance from the point of the incident and the epicenter of clashes in the center of Aleppo, where the terrorists are fighting, is no more than 5 to 7 kilometers. Now, Russia has provided all information that it has regarding the attack against this convoy, including video, in real-time video, of when this actually happened. Overall, in spite of our appeals, which are contained in decisions of the Security Council of the UN on the need to influence on the armed opposition, on the various groups. So far, the results have been very insignificant. I mentioned the list provided to us by our American partners, about 150 different organizations that were mentioned as participants of the cessation of the hostilities regime, but about more than 20 of these groups have for a long time now, and officially, right after the 12th of September, have declared that they will not comply with the cessation of hostilities agreement. And by the way, in that list, there's also Ahrar el-Asham, which we, by the way, in drafting Resolution 2254, proposed including in the list of terrorist organizations, together with another group, Jaish al-Islam, and our partners at the time said that This will not make it possible for us to work in an effective way. And as a gesture of good faith, we decided not to insist on that. And we limited the terrorist list to Jabhat al-Nusra and the so-called Islamic State. Well, the leadership of Asrar al-Sham, after the declaration of entry into force of the cessation of hostilities agreement on the 12th of September, officially stated that it will not abide by these agreements because these agreements mention al-Nusra as a terrorist organization, and Ahrar al-Sham does not consider al-Nusra as such and closely works with it. So I believe that the time has come to think about revisiting this list of terrorist organizations, especially since recently there was a very specific event or occurrence, I'd like to mention it, in the north of the Hama province. Syrian forces in the past few days have been defending against attacks by Jund al-Hadza group, so-called Jund al-Hadza group. Some have commented the fighting going on there have accused the Syrian forces, Syrian government, of violating the cessation of agreement. But yesterday, the United States stated that Jund al-Aqsa has been included in the list of terrorist organizations. So I hope that no one will demand a cessation of hostilities with that terrorist organization. I just want to mention this example, as well as what I said about the position of Ahrar al-Sham, probably will require us to revisit the list of terrorist organizations, and I think everyone needs to stop covering those who are opposed to peace and who are not implementing resolutions of the Security Council, and they should be equated with terrorists. In the last few days, in the suburbs of Damascus, the Army of Islam has tried to also conquer territory. Also, Jabhat al-Nusra and Faylaq al-Ahman unit, which is coordinating with al-Nusra, has been fighting in certain areas around Damascus, and often they use mortars to shell civilian neighborhoods. Another lesson that we'd like to draw from the latest events is that in ensuring security during humanitarian operations, the effective participation of all parties to the conflict is necessary. Not only Syrian and Russian armed forces, which are often everyone seems to demand that they ensure that they provide security, but the armed opposition and other participants, other parties need to provide guarantees as well. Yesterday, the International Syria Support Group met. Many colleagues were there. Everyone is in favor of reanimating the cessation of hostilities. Initially, the proposal was to ensure 3 days of calm. 3 days. We are convinced that this can only be done through through simultaneous steps by all the parties who are involved in the Syrian conflict in one way or another. Otherwise, nothing will happen. There won't be any unilateral pauses. We've done this already. There were unilateral pauses around Aleppo for 48 hours, 72 hours, and each time the result was that the insurgents, including Jabhat al-Nusra, were provided with reinforcements and military equipment. They used those pauses to only strengthen themselves. So now we can't even discuss unilateral measures. No. What's needed is that every single one, a member of the International Syria Support Group, especially those who were mentioned by our president, the distinguished Prime Minister of New Zealand, they need to seriously formulate guarantees that they will ensure that those units on the ground on whom they have influence, they will ensure that they will comply with all provisions of the cessation of hostilities agreement. If we can agree on this kind of comprehensive approach, a an integrated approach, multifaceted approach, then I think the chances of a cessation of hostilities surviving and being successful will be. But of course, it won't be enough to reach an agreement, but we'll have to make sure that this agreement is actually implemented. And at the end, I'd like to say that we have always put as a top priority the resumption of the inter-Syrian political dialogue without any preconditions, as demanded by Resolution 2254, with the participation of representatives of all ethnic and confessional groups to implement the roadmap that is contained in Resolution 2254 and which should lead to a solution to the Syrian crisis within, as we had hoped at the time, 18 months. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve a lasting solution and to preserve Syria as a single united state, restore the economy, ensure the return of refugees, etc. We support the efforts of the Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, and we call on everyone to continue, or on him to continue working with the parties to the conflict to ensure the continuity and the inclusive character of the negotiating process. Attempts by certain participants to put forward preconditions or ultimatums to sabotage Resolution 2254 are unacceptable. But unfortunately, such attempts have continued. And the UN Special Envoy should not accept this kind of blackmail. Negotiations should resume, and those who insist on preconditions, they should be told that these demands are counter to the demands of this body, the Security Council of the United Nations. We will contribute in every way to the efforts of Staffan de Mistura, including by working with everyone, without excluding anyone, with the Syrian government and all members of the opposition. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Foreign Minister Lavrov for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. John Kerry, Secretary of State of the United States of America.
Mr. President, good morning, and good morning to all of our colleagues here on the United Nations Security Council. I want to thank my colleague from New Zealand, particularly for hosting this very important session on the crisis in Syria. And I think it's appropriate that we are gathering here couple of rooms over from where yesterday so many heads of state came together in what I thought was a remarkably moving and eloquent statement of the consequence of this war in Syria. I listened to King Abdullah particularly talk about the impact on his country of these millions of people who are distorting their economy, putting huge pressures on the social structure of their country, living under the worst circumstances, and in some areas preventing a threat because of the ability of Daesh, ISIS, or Nusra to slip people in and present a security threat to a country. We listened to the young Olympian tell us about her dreams and how she was able to compete this year because of a refugee Olympic team. And we saw the images in a beautifully Bono-narrated video that really made us think about the consequences of this. And I hope everybody will come here today really focused on these consequences and not engage in word games that duck responsibility or avoid the choices that this great institution has in front of it with respect to war and peace, life and death. I listened to my colleague from Russia, and I sort of felt a little bit like we're sort of in a parallel universe here. He said that nobody should have any preconditions to come to the table. Well, we met in Vienna twice. We met here in New York and embraced a United Nations Security Council resolution. We met again in Munich. And in each place, the International Syria Support Group and here in the Security Council embraced a ceasefire applicable to all parties. That's not a precondition. That's an international agreement. 4 times arrived at. 4 times countries have said, we will do this. And 4 times it's been shredded by independent actors, by spoilers who don't want a ceasefire. So this is not a precondition. How can people go sit at a table with a regime that bombs hospitals and drops chlorine gas again and again and again and again and again and again and acts with impunity? You're supposed to sit there and have happy talk in Geneva under those circumstances when you've signed up to a ceasefire and you don't adhere to it? What kind of credibility do you have with any of your people? It's not a precondition. It's something we all agreed on in the United Nations and in the International Syria Support Group. And I have to say, the documents which we're prepared to release, we've told people, we announced that yesterday at the International Syria Support Group. People in the support group have the documents. But you don't need to read these documents to understand it's against international law to bomb hospitals. You don't need these documents to understand that you don't drop barrel bombs on children. These are flagrant violations of international law. So I don't want to obfuscate this process, folks. I didn't come here this morning to do that. Supposedly, we all want the same goal. I've heard that again and again. Russia, Iran, the United States, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, everybody sits there and says, we want a united Syria, secular, respecting the rights of all people, in which the people of Syria can choose their leadership. But we are proving woefully inadequate in our ability to be able to get to the table and have that conversation and make it happen. And let's face it, everybody in this room understands that there are proxies at this table and proxies outside of this room, and we know who they are, who have the ability to have an impact on the players in this conflict that has provided the greatest humanitarian catastrophe since World War II. So let's just review the bidding a bit. You know, I was privileged to serve in the United States Senate with a fellow who spent a lot of time here. He was the ambassador to the United Nations, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And he would famously remind us that everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts. And as President John Adams once said, facts are stubborn things. So I don't think we can let anybody here, if we're going to deal with this situation, have their own set of facts about Syria. Everybody here understands the depth of human tragedy. Everybody, I mean, the words are getting, you know, you wonder why people in various parts of the world are so angry about governance. It's because all they hear are words. And we know how many times we've demanded action and it doesn't take place. So I want to share some facts with you this morning. Facts. Last night, we have reports of airstrikes that hit a medical facility near Aleppo, and 4 aid workers were killed, despite the fact there's supposed to be a cessation. There are only two countries that have airplanes that are flying during the night or flying at all in that particular area, Russia and Syria. On Monday, and Sergei just said, well, let's examine the facts and see what happened. On Monday, 20 aid workers were killed in an outrageous, sustained, 2-hour attack directed at a fully authorized humanitarian mission near Aleppo, fully authorized. All of the permits had been given. Everybody was on notice. Now, this attack has dealt a very heavy blow to our efforts to bring peace to Syria, and it raises a profound doubt about whether Russia and the Assad regime can or will live up to the obligations that they agreed to in Geneva. It also raises questions, not this attack, but other events raise questions about some of the opposition. Those are facts. And the simple reality is we cannot resolve this crisis if the major parties who come to the table and agree to do something are unwilling to do what's necessary to avoid escalation. But we don't get anywhere by ignoring the facts and denying common sense. Yes, the coalition did hit people on Saturday. We did. A terrible accident. And within moments of it happening, we acknowledged it. We didn't put out a bunch of obfuscating facts. We said, yeah, it's a terrible thing, it happened. Defense Department apologized, and we tried to find out how that happened. But I got to tell you, people running around with guns on the ground from the air is a very different thing from trucks in a convoy with big UN markings all over them. Now, I am saying this, and I want to lay out these facts because it underscores why, at this moment, we just can't do business as usual. We can't walk out of this room and say, okay, we're going to try to continue, or we'll have a ceasefire that everybody knows can't work. The facts require countries to restore credibility to this process. That's what's critical. And just think about what happened in the last couple of days. First, President Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, claims that the attack on the humanitarian convoy was somehow a necessary response to an alleged offensive by al-Nusra elsewhere in the country. That's the first claim. Then a Russian ambassador said that Russia and Syrian forces were not bombing the area, but they were targeting Khan Tuman. Then we heard a completely different story. The Defense Ministry said that the aid convoy had been accompanied by militants in a pickup truck with a mortar. We've seen no evidence of that. But that, in any case, would not justify a violation of the cessation of hostilities. And by the way, that mortar could never have inflicted the damage that has been caused on those trucks. Then the Defense Ministry switched completely. And it denied Russia's involvement. It said, according to spokesman Igor Konashenkov, I quote, neither Russian nor Syria conducted airstrikes on the UN humanitarian convoy in the southwestern outskirts of Aleppo. That's a quote. Then Konashenkov went further, and he said the damage to the convoy was the direct result of the cargo catching fire. The trucks and the food and the medicine just spontaneously combusted. Anybody here believe that? I mean, this is not a joke. We're in serious business here. If we can stand up and say, yes, accidentally, we had a strike, we should have some responsibility. Maybe it's an attempt to distract attention or to somehow deflect this. But I think what it underscores is that we have a responsibility here to find a way forward. Now, guess what? Everything I just said is contradicted by public information, by conclusions already reached by the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Federation of Red Cross, the Red Crescent Societies, the Syrian Arab Crescent, independent journalists, and aid workers on the ground. Eyewitnesses. The eyewitnesses will tell you what happened. One of them said that he was standing on the ground and all of a sudden the place became hell and the fighter jets were in the sky. That's an eyewitness report. The place turned into hell and fighter jets were in the sky. There's a lot more. I'm not going to go into it all because I really want the key here to be an acceptance of responsibility to change this equation by everybody here. The primary question is no longer what do we know? The primary question is collectively what are we going to do about it? In other words, this is a moment of truth. It's a moment of truth for President Putin and Russia. It's a moment of truth also for the opposition. And it's a moment of truth for the people who support the opposition. And for too long, some elements of the opposition have relied on an unholy alliance with al-Nusra. And al-Nusra is al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. And we can't look the other way if groups are on the ground fighting alongside al-Nusra, an organization that overtly rejects a political solution to this crisis and is an enemy of all of us in this room. So it's a moment of truth for the international community too, okay? If we allow spoilers to choose the path for us, the path of escalation, if we decide not to do what it takes to make this work, this cessation of hostilities, then make no mistake, my friends. The next time we convene here, we're going to be facing a Middle East with even more refugees, with more dead, with more displaced, with more extremists, and more suffering on an even greater scale. That is a certainty. There is only one choice, and it's to get to that table with Staffan de Mistura, and it is get to a negotiation and get a ceasefire so we stop the flow of refugees, stop the suffering, and provide the people of Syria with a chance to breathe, to live. When this ceasefire first began a few weeks ago, guess what? It worked. People actually, months ago, people actually were out in the streets. They went to cafes again. Some people even demonstrated and felt their political rights. Other people, were able to walk from one place to another with a sense of safety. And all of that dissipated. So I want to emphasize this, and I emphasize this to Russia. The United States continues to believe there is a way forward that, although rocky and difficult and uncertain, can provide the most viable path out of the carnage. Our shared task here is to find a way to use the tools of diplomacy to make that happen. And that's exactly what we've been trying to accomplish. For weeks over the summer, experts from my government worked with our counterparts from Russia in good efforts to develop a plan that would take into account the lessons learned from the original cessation. And the key elements of that plan launched in Geneva 2 weeks ago include the renewal of a cessation of hostilities, excluding only Daesh and al-Nusra. Importantly, it included arrangements for the unfettered delivery of humanitarian aid to people in Aleppo and elsewhere in the country. And it envisioned the possibility, providing humanitarian assistance was unimpeded and sustained, and provided there were at least 7 days of consecutive adherence to the cessation, that the United States and Russia would begin to coordinate their efforts against Daesh and al-Nusra. And I want to make it clear, under President Obama's orders, all preparations were being made in order to achieve that cooperation in terms of our military and intelligence community and the work we would do. So we're committed to that. It was also very importantly part of the plan that when those efforts of cooperation commenced, Syrian warplanes would be prohibited from flying over areas where the legitimate opposition, al-Nusra, were present, in order to give us the opportunity to work at the separation. Now, I have said to Russia many times, it's very hard to separate people when they are being bombed indiscriminately. And when Assad has the right to determine who he's going to bomb, because he can, quote, go after Nusra, but go after the opposition at the same time because he wants to, you create a confusion that is impossible to separate out and therefore preserve a ceasefire. So we need to get to the prohibition on flying, my friends. That would prevent Syria from doing what it has done so often in the past, which is to attack civilian targets with the excuse that it is just going after Nusra. Our purpose in this negotiation was to put an end to the kind of horrific and indiscriminate attacks that have been the primary cause of fear, of suffering, of displacement. And under our plan, all of this could be quickly accompanied by serious negotiations between the parties aimed at a political transition and a conclusion to the conflict. So, my colleagues, I want you to know the United States remains convinced that the objectives outlined in the Geneva Agreement are the right objectives. And the tools, many of them are the right tools, but it may not be complete. Our hope was that the renewal of cessation of hostilities and the resumption of aid deliveries, the isolation of al-Nusra and Daesh, and the beginning of a Syrian-led negotiating process could provide a pathway out of the conflict and make possible the restoration of a peaceful Syria. Now, clearly, there are some people, it includes Assad and his allies, al-Nusra and Daesh on the other side, who fear this very outcome. Assad is a spoiler. He doesn't believe in the ceasefire. And al-Nusra and Daesh are spoilers. They don't want a ceasefire. They want to keep fighting Assad. So the question for us here today is whether we bend to their will or continue to pursue our agenda as best we can and in every way that we can, a diplomatic solution to this conflict. Now, those who believe the crisis in Syria cannot become even worse are dead wrong, as are those who believe that a military victory is possible. This could be like Carthage with the Romans, if you call that a victory. The plan announced in Geneva is far from perfect, but I have yet to hear an alternative that is remotely realistic that will lead to a better outcome. And if we could get monitoring on the ground, that would be ideal. We'd love to have monitoring on the ground. But most countries you talk to and say, would you go in and monitor, are very, very quick to say, not on my life. Now, as my colleagues from the International Syria Support Group will attest, yesterday we had a meeting, and there was near unanimity in that room that this process, the ceasefire, as troubled as it is, gives us the best chance available to bring relief to the people of Syria. Now, here's the nub of it. We have said for days that it will take significant and immediate steps now to try to get things back on track. How do we get things back on track? How do we restore the concept of a ceasefire? How do we give people who've again and again seen this fall apart some sense of credibility? Believe me, there are a lot of people who believe it can't happen. And there are some people who believe that major parties don't want it done. So I believe that to restore credibility to the process, we must move forward to try to immediately ground all aircraft flying in those key areas in order to de-escalate the situation and give a chance for humanitarian assistance to flow unimpeded. And if that happens, there's a chance of giving credibility back to this process. In Geneva, Russia related that Assad was prepared to live by the cessation of hostilities and would accept the idea of not flying over agreed-upon areas. But because of what's happened in the last few days, my friends, we have no choice but to try to do that sooner, not later, move immediately to restore confidence, and demonstrate the readiness to implement a genuine ceasefire now. The future of Syria is hanging by a thread, and I urge this Council not to give up, but instead to support the steps outlined by the United States and Russia in Geneva, and I call on every party in Syria and those who support them. I call on all members of the opposition to cooperate and revive this plan. And I call on every country to cease providing support of any kind to any party that is trying to sabotage this plan. I call on the international community to support UN efforts to begin a real negotiation in Geneva on a political transition that can provide the only durable route to peace. And I urge the entire international community to get behind the best chance that we have yet had to reduce the violence, to provide humanitarian assistance, and to open up the space for negotiations. I thank you for your patience.
Thank Secretary Kerry for his statement. I give the floor now to His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful, Your Excellency Mr. John Key, Prime Minister of New Zealand and President of the Security Council, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, let me at first begin by thanking Mr. John Key, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for convening this meeting. I would like to express my deepest condolences to UN workers who were targeted by a cowardly attack while trying to fulfill their duty to bring humanitarian assistance to civilians 2 days ago.